Good morning, everybody, and good morning, Sarh Cox. How are you this morning, Sarah?
I'm very well, Mark.
Oh, that's great. Sarah and I wrote a book together some time ago called The Power of Great Questions. So we haven't done one of these interviews much for a fair while. But Sarah, I wanted to introduce everyone to you today because we're doing a lot of work together. A lot of our clients and so on in regard to rural succession solutions, we're concerned and want to help people with emotional resilience. And that's one of the big things, I think, at the moment, and one of the topics that, Sarah, you're very good at helping people to work their way through. But I guess before we talk too much about emotional resilience, Sarah, as I say, good morning this morning, and maybe if you can just help by starting off on what is emotional resilience, because it's a big part of what we're doing together.
So there's actually a few types of resilience. There's physical, emotional, mental, and psychological, which all wraps into one. Emotional resilience is probably the most important because life is dictated by the quality of our emotions, really. And so it's the ability to be able to cope and be able to stay on top of the water when bad things happen. Stresses occur, outside influences in the rural community. People know about drought, floods, fires. So how do you bounce back and become what you were before as far as resilient? So what's your strength? It's pretty much the core strength to lift the load of life, because there's so many things in life that can go wrong, and particularly as we get older, we've had tragedy, we might have had floods, fires, droughts, things go wrong with our children. There's many compounded stress that's happened and trauma. So how can we cope in those phases of stresses and trauma? So the main things with resilience is how calm are you in stresses and things that are going on. So it's around your emotional capability of being able to be in control. So really, that's in a nutshell. I can talk more about that.
I'm sure you could talk all day about this stuff, I know. But what do you mean as we get older? Sorry, was there something I missed? Is that happening, is it?
Well, yeah, and so the timeline is as a child you might have trauma, and whether you have resolved that trauma, then you have another trauma or something else happens, stresses pile up on top of each other. So there becomes a compounded type of load that weights down on our shoulders. And if we're not resolving those things as we go and working through those things as we go, then we come to a point in life that maybe our resilience is really low and something's happened and we find ourselves anxious, depressed, not able to cope, and we're needing help. And so basically, that's when there's conflict in families, family dynamics just go out the window. All sorts of things happen. Relationships break down, primary relationships with children, all sorts of outside relationships, business relationships. So depending on what the stresses are, the traumas are compounded, and then once the person becomes weak, it's very hard for them to get back on their horse, so to speak.
And it didn't take you long to bring the horse up again, did it? And which raises another interesting issue is that I know you help people with equine therapy as well, and I'll just throw this in to totally pattern interrupt on the way through. But equine therapy, you've used that a few times in the past. How have you found that's been a great help for people?
Equine therapy is really good for trauma, autism, any emotional disturbances, anxiety, depression, because the horse is a flight animal. So it depends on survival, depends on feeling safe. And like a horse, we actually all need to feel safe and secure. And when our security and our safety is jeopardized at any stage of our life, we go into a survival mechanism. And that's when we have to use our coping skills, our good communication skills, and all sorts of skills that go with resilience. So when you're dealing with a horse, well, they're about body language. They don't talk, so to speak. They don't have any judgment. So they're picking up, they're highly sensed animals, and they're picking up on emotions. And this becomes a very important part of building emotional resilience, because, as I said, when we're calm in our emotions, then we're able to cope. When we're relaxed in our body and our mind and our emotions, then we can deal with stresses and we can make better decisions. We can plan in a way that's more effective.
Sarah, what you're saying, and I guess what you've observed over the years, and others have as well, is that you're talking about things happen in people's lives, in a negative way along the way as we go through lives. So basically, if you don't deal with it at the time, and it's like a pressure valve, isn't it? You're saying, so that eventually things build up and they build up, and if you don't pay attention to them and do something about them, the pressure has to be released at some stage, and that's where trauma and that's where bad things can happen effectively. Is that right?
Yeah. So, well, there's a consequence of that. We wake up around 50 and 60, and we start to see patterns of behaviour in our life, or we see things starting to compound, and then our resilience is low. And that's really when you do need to get help. But better still is, as you say, Mark, resolving resentments, resolving conflict in family. If there's been abuse, domestic violence, trauma, medical emergencies, sickness, all those things have an effect on us. It can't not, we're human. And so it's how we, that's my poodle in the background. He reckons that he knows all about it.
He needs help.
Yeah, and I have a therapy dog too to help with this. So when I see people in person, but I do a lot of my work online. So it's really those things that come from life, and also internally, because we have our conditioning of how we were brought up, how we were parented. So we have a culture of conditioning, and how has that affected us to function in life, particularly when stresses and different things come from the outside. Natural disasters. We've just gone through the whole COVID thing. How have we coped? How have we adapted? How have we been flexible around that? And people have found it very, very difficult. So, and understandably, because it's the unseen, it's the unknown, it's the unsafe that makes people start to question themselves, question life. And they sometimes lose meaning in life, start to lose their gratitude towards life and their acceptance. So these are the things that we work with, and trying to rebuild that resilience, because it is, you can rebuild the resilience. Just because you've lost it, you can get it back.
Sure. So I just want to talk practically. So last year it was a very busy year for us, and there was probably about, I keep referring back to a figure of about 90% of the people, families that I dealt with last year, at some stage during the conversation and the relationship with those people, I effectively tried to refer them on to you or some sort of counselling because of internal family issues and so on. And so, from a simple old layperson like me, who's not as qualified as you are, what I see is issues around communication, where the lack of communication builds up over a period of time. And you've heard me talk about the exponential grief curve, and that is the longer that there's no conversation between mum and dad and the next generation coming through, eventually it's like you've described, it just gets to a point where it just blows up, and family relationships fall apart. It's sort of in an exponential way. People put up with lack of communication for a period of time, but eventually it just grows and grows more quickly. So there's that, and that's what leads to conflict. So I'll just come back, and I know sometimes I waffle off and make a whole lot of statements without asking a question, but the fact that such a high percentage of the people that we dealt with last year did in some point need some sort of counselling or some sort of help with their emotional state, position, or relationships. What is that showing to you? Is that unusual, or do you think that's a reflection of society?
I think it's a reflection of society, yes, definitely, and then whatever's gone on for those people. I'll just go back to communication. So some of the attributes of a resilient person is good communication. You know, they can communicate well. They have good coping skills, a sense of support, family, friends. They're willing to ask for support and ask for help. Emotional regulation comes into it in a big way. So part of a resilient person is someone who's very emotionally intelligent, aware of their emotions at any given time. And I suppose when you leave things unresolved and don't work through them, they go into the unconscious mind and they stay there. And then when there's something from the outside that hits them or from behind unexpectedly, then their drivers are from that unconscious thing that's been sort of the lid's been gone on. So if people can learn to actually know their feelings at the time, be able to express them effectively in communication, and be able to say their needs and request for what they need. There's a whole system around communication that I do with people, which is very, very helpful and supportive, and it brings families together, brings relationships together. So as a resilient person, I would say that they're doing those things, and then when the resilience goes down or weakens, they're not doing those things. So the emotional regulation, and I'll tell you what that is. It's just being able to come back to a sense of calm. So we have lots of emotions, and sure, you know, what's said is it's energy in motion. So we need to release those emotions as we go in the moment, being present. And when we don't, then they're held on. And so in a conversation, if something comes up and it's not spoken about, then it's sort of hidden away or talked about behind or after the fact. So it's learning to be able to move through and stay present and be able to come back to a calm state of mind, calm state of body. And that's where I teach a lot of relaxation techniques, breathing techniques, meditation techniques. And this really helps the frontal cortex activate into the seat of compassion, where people then go back to the calm state. So I know that's a lot of information and it's quite complex. It's quite necessary for people when they're not coping, or they've got anxiety or depression or conflict in the family or past history of whatever, and they haven't worked through it.
Yeah, one of the things I've done a few podcasts on recently, Sarah, is communication, specifically from the older generations towards the younger generations. And I'm striking, there's been a few families where parents or grandparents just don't want to start up the conversation with the kids coming through. And I know sometimes that's a historical gene problem, meaning that their parents never talked to them about money. You know, I've used the word, you know, in the old days, talking about money was vulgar and all those sorts of things. You know, you didn't have those sorts of conversations, but there's so much more information available these days. Kids these days do communicate a lot more in different forms. I know, not necessarily eye to eye, but you know, they have information and they need to talk about these issues. And so one of the greatest, and you know, there's a prospective client comes to mind straight away. He refuses to talk to his kids about succession planning. They've come to me and said, how can you help Dad open up the conversation? But the minute if he finds out that they've sort of sent me to talk to him, he'll shut down because he doesn't want to feel manipulated or anything. So, for families like that, this is a good practical question I'm asking you here, is where there is a lack of communication between parents and children, the intergenerational communication, what advice would you give to those sorts of families on both sides?
Oh, that's a very large question with lots.
You weren't ready for that one.
Well, it comes back to the same thing. What is the deeper issue behind not talking? Like, what is the deeper issue about shutting down? Is that a habit that's happened within the communication? Is it passive aggression? Is it sense of control? Is it power? Is it Is it something to do with not being open? Is it something that the relationships have broken down over time and they've got to that point? Is it so many things that could be? So it's basically opening up the sense of trust to be able to talk about, well, what's behind this? What is the reason for communicating?
Yeah, and I guess, sorry,
part of our support in life is we have the ability to communicate. We are human, we're not horses. That's not to say we don't communicate on a lot of levels. We communicate, body language is a big part of it. And so when there's a sense of passive aggression, there's tension that builds up. So people can feel it. Like, you can say nothing and you can be saying a lot. So there's so many levels of communication, but really the answer to your question, I suppose, it's what's behind the communication. What's happening in each individual's lives, because it's not just one individual. There's a family is like a puzzle. There's each part of the puzzle. So if you don't have that piece of the puzzle, the puzzle can't be sort of complete. And I'm not saying that the aim is harmony. The aim is to have,
sure,
a communicating family. Do you ever get there? I'm not sure. But if we aim for it, then we're going to be more likely to get there.
Sure. And I guess what my approach with families is, you can't fix this from within the family, is probably what I usually say to people. In other words, to think that you're just going to cruise along, as has always been the case, and fix it up is never going to happen. And that's where I guess, me coming in as an independent person, hopefully there's trust for the parents being able to have a conversation with me, with the kids and so on. And certainly, the clients that have spent time with you, that someone outside, they can feel you're a safe zone for them to talk to about their issues. So, but no, I raise that because it's a very topical and very prominent issue in families.
Well, it's highly confidential, my work with clients. So I'm talking to the individual, and I think that sometimes we just can't do it alone. We need an objective person to be sort of helping for the person to see certain things, which sometimes we don't see the things ourselves. And that's what I say about emotional intelligence and building emotional intelligence, because it's very linked to resilience. When a person knows what's going on within them, why, the question why, it's very important for resolve, because then they can move through. But sometimes we don't know. And that's that bringing up the unconscious and starting to talk about things. A lot of men and men over a certain age, they have a patriarchal influence, which has been in our society for a long time. And it's the head of the house. I make the decisions and you don't influence me. And that sort of, and that what that does, it isolates them and cuts them off from their family and in the general support of life. So if we can open it up, and I think of the words humility and gratitude to be two wonderful words, because that's the intention behind being open and open-hearted and starting to communicate.
Gratitude. Sorry. Sometimes you take a pause, and I'm just trying to find a moment to jump in there. No, I'm just going to catch up on your gratitude, the comment about gratitude, because that to me is one of the most important parts of the whole process. And part of our process actually is when I have individual conversations with the children, is to have what we call a gratitude conversation with the kids. I just want to get the mindset, and you understand about mindset, and you have free to talk about that if you like as well. But I just want to keep reinforcing with people that we need to approach succession planning, estate planning, and so on from a position of gratitude, not entitlement or expectation. And so occasionally that does come out. That expectation and entitlement attitude, which is unfortunate.
So on two on two accounts. Not in the
That's right, Roger.
Yeah. So on two accounts, there's it's linked with compassion. So when we have compassion and we feel for another human being, we feel our own pain or our own feelings, but we actually move into the other person and feel what's going on for them. That's one thing, and I say it's linked in with gratitude, because as acceptance is also linked in to this whole process. I talk about forgiveness as well. So one thing that comes from entitlement is a deep sense of insecurity, and it's also can come from resentment and feeling like someone owes me something, or I deserve something because of, or whatever. And then it sets up, so there's a much deeper issue under entitlement. It's not just what it seems. So that's another conversation, and that's around communication and getting to the bottom of that. Then that freedom happens. People can start to talk about, well, what is it beneath that sense of entitlement? And look, we live in a different society with kids growing up, and perhaps it's been fed, I deserve. I'm not sure in what areas that you're talking about succession planning
Sure.
at the moment, but there's so many areas of sense of entitlement.
You've raised and helped explain one particular case, Sarah, that happened last year, which kind of left me floored. And this is not a client you dealt with, so we're not covering any confidential areas here. But it was a daughter. Well, I had two cases of daughters-in-law, but I'll talk about this one. Is where the daughter-in-law, right from the go-get, and I have conversations with mum, dad, then individually, then the kids, and so on individually as well, and the sons-in-law, daughters-in-law. And this daughter-in-law, just as soon as I walked in the door, said, I want everything transferred to us now. I want a house in town, and if I don't get it, I'm going to leave, I'm going to leave Johnny, whatever, the son of the parents I was working with. So she had entitlement, she had expectations, and she had a whole range of things going on. But, when you look back, she came from a background of scarcity, and she had a very high need for security and protection. She needed a house. She needed, because that was something she hadn't come from. So you've helped me unravel what her issues were there. But the threats to leave, to divorce, if she didn't get her own way, and bullying, and so on. That's one issue, and I know you hate it when I give you two at once, but I'm also going to raise the issue of other sorts of emotional issues such as narcissism and so on, which I've struck on a number of occasions. Those sorts of issues, obviously, they're people that you're used to dealing with. General comments in regard to narcissistic behaviour? I'll bring it back to one.
Okay, so narcissistic, break it up a little bit. So there's narcissistic traits or narcissistic behaviour, as you say. And then there's narcissistic personality disorder and malignant narcissism. And so I'll just go back to the daughter-in-law story. Now we're just surmising, okay? So we're assuming. we don't really know the details. I would assume she had deep insecurity. So all of a sudden, her security around money is threatened. Her security around survival at home is very important for our survival needs. So she would be coming from feeling unsafe. And then what happens is terrible communication of threats. One of the things that has to be taken out of any of these scenarios is threats. Threats are highly aggressive, and they put people on the back foot. They induce guilt. It's very manipulative. There's so many things that threats are not good for relationships at all. Yet she needed to do some work, let's say. Going back to narcissism, now narcissism is when it's malignant narcissism or narcissistic personality disorder, unfortunately, we don't see much change. We don't see much insight of the person. But what happens is anybody around in the family being bullied and manipulated by these people, it's highly abusive and it's very, very insidious. And over time, those people get broken down. We're talking about resilience here. Those people lose their resilience. They get so incredibly weak, anxious, depressed, even psychotic. A true narcissistic personality, a narc, they call it, can really influence someone to go a bit crazy. It's crazy making, because what they do is not seeing the outside world. It's behind closed doors, and it's more prevalent in our, well, is it more prevalent in our society? I don't think so. It's been going on for a long time through all the ages, but we're more aware of it. And if we can pick up narcissistic abuse in a family or in relationships, it's very, very, it's a great thing, because we then understand the person who's been narcissistically abused, and they're suffering. But the narcissistic personality disorder or malignant narcissism comes from a deep sense of insecurity once again. So behaviors that are aggressive, people who haven't got emotional intelligence are just people that are in their child form. They haven't grown. And so part of the resilience is learning to be able to cope with life and stresses and everything that's going on, the load of life, at the same time as being able to grow. We want to grow and contribute. That's what we want to do as we get older. And a narcissist doesn't do that. It's all about them. It's all about their needs, what they want, and they're sourcing it out of people that they choose.
Yeah, so that which in itself then rolls back to the original comment we were talking about, which is emotional resilience. Sarah, is that the emotional resilience of someone who's in a relationship with a narcissist or has a narcissistic parent, whatever, is always going to be highly diminished, isn't it? And that's where you've been able in a number of cases to come in and help those people with tools and capabilities and coping mechanisms and ways to I guess deal with the situation that they're in, and I know you've done a great job, and I'm just going to call you out here. You've done a great job with all the people that we've sent your way. Everyone's come back with very good comments, and I've seen the progress that you've been able to help people with. So thank you. It's I'd press the applause button if I had one, but I don't. I can't get one.
Yeah. So the main thing I just add to it, whilst a family member or anyone's dealing with a narcissist, if they've had a separation and they're going through a property settlement or they're doing succession planning or whatever, while they're having to deal with that narcissist, they need to have help with managing their emotions, because they can go down. And it's very hard to make decisions when you're being abused by a narcissist. And there's a lot of legal abuse from narcissists. They love getting into the legal arena because they're not going to stop at what they want.
You're reminding me of about half a dozen people I know already.
After, if there's ever an end to the process, then what those people need to do is cut off from the narcissist, have nothing to do with them. Because unfortunately, even if it's a family member, there's still the damage. Because those, if it's a child coming from a narcissist parent, they've had to deal with this narcissistic behaviour from a very early age. By the time they get into the later age, they're really very much diminished, even with the awareness of the behaviour. And it's very hard to say, well, won't they change? Won't they? Don't they see what they're doing? Well, no, they don't. And that's where the person really needs to have help with management of the stresses, so that they can cope through that process. And then at the other side, they just have to create a completely different life away from the narcissist.
Sarah, we should have put an hour or so aside to have this conversation. We're past our 30 minutes already, and I thank you for all you've gone through today. It's been great chatting with you. But I just want to go back, if I may, and indulge here for a minute, and that is in my business in succession planning, withdrawal succession planning. What I've learned over the last couple of years is that it's not a case of just going in and helping people get their estate sorted and saying, okay, well, how are we going to put the succession plan together? From very early in the piece, I realised that emotional resilience and sometimes, and I'm going to call it mental health issues, whatever they may be, emotional resilience deficiencies and so on, everything we've talked about today is just a very big part. And I can't do my job to help families if the families are going through communication, conflict, and so on. And so, it's been well over 18 months now, I think, since we've been, sending people to Sarah to talk through some of these issues and going, sometimes hard conversation for me to say to a client, I think I'd better refer you off to someone, because there's that, and we will spend a couple more minutes on this, Sarah, and you'll understand what I'm talking about here. Men especially, it's a hard conversation to say to a guy, I'd like you to go and see. I can't do any more work with you until you spend some time having a chat with a counsellor, a friend of mine, because I think there's some issues maybe you need to talk about before we can make any progress in regard to helping your family. And that's a tough call. Guys aren't as open to that. Women are much more open to having a conversation with someone like Sarah. But having said all that, everyone that I've sent to you, Sarah, all the guys, everyone, you've had 100% strike rate. Everyone's been very comfortable talking to you and so on. So thank you for the work that you've done. But do you just want to cover off a bit on why men find it a little harder to open up?
Well, men, they're not that much difference to women in that they have the same emotions, they feel the same things, and a lot of men are very, very sensitive. Yet, as little boys, it's like they fall over. Come on, hurry up, stand up. Don't cry. Wipe the dirt off and get on with it. Little girls get hugged and emotionally, once they stop crying, then they get put down. So I'm just saying, probably not so much in the generation coming up now, and possibly that's why younger men are willing to have conversations, and these crucial conversations are much more open emotionally. It's the emotional intelligence that is not sort of encouraged from a young age with men, and particularly rural men, because you've just got to be tough. And even though I talk about emotional resilience as being toughness, it's about knowing your emotions. Being vulnerable is actually strength. So with what I find there's a certain age, and going back to the patriarchal society, men are very much influenced by that. Well, we can't talk about emotions. Come on, get on with it. Just get on with life. And what happens is things get swept under the carpet. The lump under the carpet gets bigger. The elephant is in the room. And the women are wanting to talk about it. And then what happens is there's sort of a divide. Women who have been brought up to be more emotionally intelligent, encouraged to be emotionally intelligent and know their emotions, they're almost shutting down too, because they've got no one to talk to. Now, when I speak to men, it's allowing them to open up in their own time. And once they do, they find it very, very easy to be able to talk about the thing that's going on. I often say, "How do you feel?" to a man, and he says, "Well, I think da da da."
Thank you.
Yeah, and it's sort of like, well, what's the practicality of this? How do you fix it? We have to solve problems. That's what a man will think. Whereas a woman will just want to be listened to. Listening is one of the most important things of communication, and deep listening. So it's not just listening to the content, it's listening to the emotion below the content. It's listening to the whole part of the conversation. What's going on for this person as we listen to them? And I think that's the difference between men and women. Women have learned as young little girls, if you see them in the playground, one little girl falls over and cuts herself, all the little girls come around and then they sit down and they have a conversation. They're all sitting together. Guys will might fall over on the football field, and someone might slap them on the back, and they keep running and kicking the ball. So their mechanism is action. Get on with it, solve the problem. So there's a divide there. And I see a lot of rural men, when it comes to drought, I mean, it's a huge thing when it's a never ending. You never know when it's going to end, and there's a whole uncertainty. And they start to feel very, very isolated and lonely. And it's so easy for men to, like there's guns on the property, and the women are scared stiff about this, men not being in touch with their emotions. So when I see men, I see such an incredible difference after they're able to talk about these emotions and get them out. So I am not sure if I've answered the question completely, but I think that the basis is that difference. Why the difference?
Yeah, no, you've done a good job. Thank you, Sarah. And as I say, your role is such an important part in what we help people with estate and specifically succession planning. And thanks for all you do. If people want to just call you directly, somebody who might be watching this and either we're not working with them or they just want to have a chat with you anyway, sarahcoxcoaching.com.au, sarahcoxcoaching.com.au, or give me a note and I'll send you Sarah's details. So Sarah, thanks very much for being here today. Thanks for chatting, and all very good and wise words of wisdom, and thanks you're doing for all our clients as well.
Thank you, Mark.
Talk soon. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.